subtle, eerie digital static fades in and out quickly. Warning, the system you trust is a lie. The classes, the levels, the magic, it's all a cage. And tonight on Chronicle, we tell the forbidden story of the one soul born outside that cage, and how he brought the whole thing crashing down. Greetings and welcome to the Chronicles. We are the keepers of lore, documenting the forgotten sagas and the whispered legends of realms far beyond our own. But before we begin this journey, a question for you. If you were born into a world of magic and classes, which would you choose? A brave warrior, a cunning rogue, or a powerful mage? Share your choice in the comments below. Now find a comfortable spot, dim the lights, and let the truth of the Null who broke the system unfold before you. The Chronicle begins now.
What's the worst nightmare for an adventurer? To be born without a class in a world where only class matters. In the city of Nexus, a metropolis built on the thrill of the dungeon crawl and the glory of the system, your worth is measured in two things: your class and your level. You were a warrior, a mage, a ranger, a paladin. You leveled up, learned skills, and became a legend. Or you were nothing. My story is about a boy who was born nothing. His name was Kale, and the system designated him as Null, level 0. No class, no skill tree, no future. In Nexus, children receive their class at the age of 10 in a grand ceremony called the Awakening. Kale remembered his day with a cold dread. While other children erupted in auras of blue for mages or gold for paladins, he stood on the podium and the system crystal above him remained dark. The proctor, a stern-faced cleric, read the verdict with thinly veiled pity. Kale of the lower districts, designated Null. The years that followed were a lesson in cruelty. Other kids learned to conjure fireballs and practice swordplay. Kale learned to be invisible. He was a glitch, an error message in human form. He couldn't join the Adventurers Academy. He couldn't get a decent job, as even bakers and blacksmiths had classes like artisan or crafter that helped their trade. He survived on scraps, doing the filthiest jobs no one else would. His only companion, the silent, empty status screen that appeared in his vision whenever he willed it. Name: Kale. Level: 0. Class: Null. Skills: none. By 19, Kale was desperate. His mother was sick, and the only medicine that could help was made from sunroot, an herb that only grew in the deepest, most dangerous parts of the Whisperwood. But to get an entry permit to the Whisperwood, you needed an adventurer's license. And to get a license, you needed a class. There was one loophole, a faded parchment pinned under a dozen others. Quest: pest extermination. Location: the Goblin's Maw Cave. Objective: clear out the goblin infestation. Reward: 5 silver coins. Provisional adventurer's license. Warning: cave system is known to be unstable. Previous parties have reported system errors and unpredictable monster behavior. Quest is designated hazard level E, non-standard. Non-standard. That was him. Kale tore the parchment from the board. The clerk at the counter, a bored-looking ranger with a ranger tattoo, laughed when he saw it. The Maw? Kid, that cave is a joke. Goblins there don't even give experience points. It's a system glitch. You'll die for nothing. I'll take it, Kale said, his voice quiet but firm. The Goblin's Maw was a dark, damp fissure in the side of a hill, smelling of moss and decay. Armed with a rusty short sword he'd bought with his last coppers and a flickering lantern, Cale stepped inside. The clerk was right. When he faced the first goblin, a scrawny creature with crazed eyes, he felt nothing. The goblin lunged, and Cale dodged clumsily, plunging his sword into its chest. It fell, dead. No chime, no experience gained notification. Nothing. He fought his way deeper into the cave, a grim determination setting in. He killed 5, then 10 goblins. He was clumsy, inefficient, and his body ached. Without class skills like a warrior's power strike or a rogue's backstab, every fight was a desperate struggle for survival. He was bleeding from a dozen small cuts. Cornered in a narrow passage by 3 goblins at once, he knew he was going to die. He raised his sword to block a club swing, bracing for the impact. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness of his mind, he didn't see his life flash before him. He saw the movements of the adventurers he'd watched for years in the city square. The way a warrior braced his feet, the way a rogue shifted his weight, the way a mage held his hands to focus. He copied it. Without thinking, he shifted his stance, angling his sword not to block the blow head-on, but to deflect it. The club scraped off his blade, throwing the goblin off balance. And then it happened. A sound, a soft, gentle ding. A notification appeared in his vision, simple, blue, and beautiful. Basic skill learned. Minor parry. Description: a fundamental sword deflection technique. No class requirement. Cale's eyes widened. A skill. He had a skill. It wasn't on any skill tree he had ever seen. It was basic, a fundamental. He tried it again. As the second goblin swung, he focused, mimicked the movement, and activated minor parry. His sword moved with an unnatural swiftness, perfectly deflecting the blow. A new world of possibilities opened to him. He survived the encounter, and with a new fervor, he started experimenting. He watched the way the goblin shaman in the back of the cave held a glowing rock and mumbled. Cale copied the gesture, the sound. He felt a tiny spark of energy in his palm. Ding. Basic skill learned. Glimmer. Description: a fundamental light cantrip. Creates a brief flash of light. No class requirement. He thought about the way he'd been sneaking through the tunnels, trying to avoid patrols. He focused on quieting his breath, his footsteps. Ding. Basic skill learned. Silent step. Description: a fundamental stealth technique. Briefly muffles the sound of your movement. No class requirement. He was a null. He had no access to the grand, complex skill trees of the system, but he could learn the roots. He could learn the fundamental building blocks of every class. The rest of the cave was his laboratory. He lured a goblin near a ledge, then used glimmer to blind it, causing it to stumble and fall. He used silent step to get behind the hulking goblin chieftain, landing a critical blow on the back of its neck with his rusty sword. He discovered he could combo his skills. He would silent step and then immediately use minor parry on an unsuspecting foe, breaking their stance and opening them up for an attack. He cleared the cave. Exhausted, bleeding, but alive. And for the first time in his life, his status screen wasn't empty. Name: Cale. Level: 0. Class: Null. Skills: minor parry, glimmer, silent step. When he came back to the guild hall covered in grime and goblin blood and placed the chieftain's chipped axe on the counter, the clerk stared in disbelief. He stamped the provisional license without a word. Cale took his 5 silver coins, went to the apothecary, and bought the sunroot for his mother. This was only the beginning. With his license, Cale could take more quests. He chose the strange ones, the ones in dead zones where the system was weak and experience gain was minimal, because in those places, the fundamentals were all that mattered. He took a quest to retrieve a lost artifact from a flooded ruin. There, by watching the way aqua elementals moved, he learned aquasphere, a basic skill to create a small ball of water. It was useless in a fight, but he used it to short out the ruin's ancient electrical traps. He hunted a shadow cat in a forest where magic was dampened. He couldn't use glimmer, but by studying the cat's movements, he learned dash, a short burst of speed, and quick eye, a basic perception skill. His arsenal grew. He wasn't leveling up, but he was getting stronger, more versatile. He was a warrior, a mage, and a rogue, all at level 0. His unique success started to draw attention. One day, after turning in a quest to map the unstable Warrens, a dungeon known for its shifting walls, he was stopped by a group of high-level adventurers. Their leader was Rivar, a level 45 paladin in gleaming golden armor, the arrogant protege of a noble house. "You're the Null," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "I've heard the stories. They say you're getting by on tricks and luck in broken dungeons. That's not real adventuring. That's just picking through the system's trash." Kel met his gaze. "It gets the job done." "Does it?" Rivar laughed. "Let me show you what a real class can do." He drew his great sword, which hummed with holy energy. "I challenge you to a duel. If you can land a single scratch on me, I'll acknowledge you. If not, you will turn in your license and go back to cleaning sewers where you belong."
The duel took place in the guild's training yard. A crowd gathered, eager to see the glitch get put in his place. Kale stood with his simple short sword against a champion of the system. The fight began. Rivar was a blur of golden light and powerful attacks. He used Holy Strike, Shield of Judgment, Charge of Light. Kale didn't even try to attack. He just survived. He used Dash to dodge, Minor Parry to deflect, Silent Step to reposition. He used Glimmer to disrupt Rivar's focus for a split second, and Quick Eye to anticipate the angle of his next swing. For 10 minutes, Rivar couldn't touch him. The paladin grew frustrated, his attacks becoming more reckless. The crowd fell silent, watching in awe as the level 0 reject danced around their golden boy. Finally, Rivar unleashed his ultimate skill, Heaven's Wrath, a massive overhead strike designed to shatter any defense. The great sword blazed with light. Kale knew he couldn't parry it, he couldn't dodge it, so he did something else. As the sword came down, he activated Aquasphere, creating a ball of water right in front of Rivar's face. It was a pathetic, non-damaging spell, but for the briefest of moments, the water refracted the divine light of the attack, blinding Rivar. In that same moment, Kale used Dash. He didn't run away. He ran forward. He slid under the wild swing, and as he passed the paladin, he dragged the tip of his rusty sword across the back of Rivar's golden greave. It left a thin, ugly scratch. The great sword slammed into the ground, cracking the flagstones. The yard was silent. Kale stood on the other side of the crater, breathing heavily. He had won. Rivar stared at the scratch on his pristine armor, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. He didn't say a word. He just turned and stormed out of the yard, the crowd parting before him. Kale was no longer just a curiosity. He was a problem. A level 0 who had embarrassed a level 45 paladin. The system didn't make sense anymore. The guildmaster, a grizzled old dwarf with a braided beard and one eye, called Cale into his office. "I saw what you did out there, boy," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "You're not just a null, you're something else." He gestured to a locked chest in the corner of the room. "The system is a gift, but it's also a cage. It gives us power, but it makes us predictable. We rely on the same skills, the same strategies. We've forgotten the fundamentals. You are free from that cage." It was then that the true test arrived. A world-level threat alert, the first in a century. A dungeon boss had appeared in the deep catacombs beneath Nexus, a monster so powerful it was designated Aberration. Parties of high-level adventurers had gone in. None had come out. Reports from the few survivors were terrifying. The creature, a system devourer, seemed to feed on class-based skills. The more powerful the skill used against it, the stronger it became. Fireball would heal it, Holy Strike would make it faster. It was immune to the system that governed their world. "They're all useless against it," Thorbeck said, his voice grim. "Their greatest weapons are its food, but your skills have no class. They are not part of the grand design. They are the base code, the building blocks. They might be the only thing it can't devour." Cale knew what he had to do. This wasn't about a license or proving someone wrong. It was about saving the city that had scorned him. He ventured into the catacombs. With him went a handful of adventurers who had seen the duel and believed in him, including a humbled Revar who had been ordered by Torbeck to go, stripped of his holy magic, and told only to use his shield to protect Cale. The final chamber was a vast cavern littered with the broken weapons of fallen heroes. In the center was the Aberration. It was a horrifying creature of shifting shadows and glitching light, like a living error message. The fight was unlike anything Cale had ever experienced. The Aberration ignored the others, its non-eyes fixed on Cale, the only real threat in the room. It unleashed waves of raw, anti-system energy. Cale was a whirlwind of fundamental skills. He used Dash to navigate the chaotic battlefield. He used Stone Shard, a basic earth skill he'd learned from a badger-like creature, to create small barriers. He used Quick Eye to find fleeting weaknesses in the monster's shifting form. Revar, true to his word, acted as his shield, blocking devastating blows that would have killed Cale instantly. The Aberration roared in frustration. It couldn't consume Cale's power because Cale had no power to consume. He was just a boy with a sword and a perfect understanding of the basics. For the final blow, Cale orchestrated a symphony of simplicity. He had the party's ranger fire a normal, non-magical arrow. As the Aberration swatted it aside, Cale used Glimmer, not as an attack, but to illuminate a tiny shimmering core that appeared in the monster's chest for a split second. At the same time, he used Silent Step to close the distance and Dash for a final burst of speed. He didn't have a flashy ultimate skill. All he had was a rusty sword and a single, desperate idea. He drove his sword forward, not with a power strike, but with a simple, perfectly executed thrust. And as the blade went in, he channeled every ounce of his will into one final basic skill, one he had learned from watching blacksmiths in the market. Minor Reinforce, a cantrip used to temporarily strengthen metal. The rusty sword glowed with a faint white light. It held together just long enough to pierce the aberration's core. There was no grand explosion. The creature simply dissolved. It unraveled like a bad piece of code being deleted, fading into nothingness. The silence in the cavern was absolute. Kale had won. The level 0 Null had defeated a monster that laughed at the world's most powerful heroes. Back in Thorbeck's office, the old dwarf poured him a drink. "What I am about to tell you does not leave this room," he said. "The system is not a god. It is a machine. An ancient, powerful machine designed to protect our world, and it is breaking down. These aberrations, they are the results, glitches, errors in the code." He looked at Kale in his one good eye. "The system designated you null because it couldn't read you. You exist outside of its primary functions. The ancient texts called beings like you correctors. They said that when the system fails, a null will rise to reset the balance." Kale looked at his hands. For so long they had been empty, useless. Now they held the fate of the world. He was no longer a glitch. He was the cure. His life as an outcast was over, but his adventure, his true adventure, was just beginning. The world had a new kind of hero, not a hero of level or of class or of skill, but a hero of fundamentals. The Null who broke the system only to save it.
The silence in Thorbeck's office was heavier than any monster. Kyle, the boy who was a glitch, was now the world's only corrector. The title felt alien, a suit of armor too large for his shoulders. Fame was a peculiar side effect. In the taverns, they no longer whispered insults, but theories. Some called him a hero, others a harbinger chaos. High-level adventurers who once sneered now watched him with a mixture of fear and calculated respect. He was no longer invisible. He was a living question mark in the heart of the system. Life didn't get simpler. It got complicated. 2 days after the aberration's defeat, a delegation arrived from the kingdom's capital, Argentis. They weren't soldiers, but scholars from the royal archives, led by a tall, silver-haired elf named Ilara. Her eyes were the color of a winter sky, sharp and analytical. She wasn't there to congratulate him. She was there to study him. "The system does not make mistakes," she stated, her voice calm and precise as she observed Kyle in the guild's training yard. "A null is a paradox. You, Kyle, are a walking paradox, and the Royal Mage Council finds paradoxes unsettling." Ilara became his shadow, documenting his every skill, his every combination. But unlike the others, her curiosity was not born of fear, but of genuine intellect. She saw what Thorbeck saw, that Kyle wasn't a flaw in the system, but perhaps a feature it had forgotten. It was Ilara who first connected the dots. Reports began trickling in from across the kingdom, not of monsters, but of something far stranger. In the farming villages of the Green Valley, the soil was turning to gray, pixelated dust. In the port city of Azurgard, the tide would sometimes freeze in place for hours.
Adventurers reported their class skills flickering, failing, or worse, producing bizarre, unintended effects. A paladin's holy strike turned a bandit into a flock of terrified chickens. A mage's teleport sent him 3 feet to the left and upside down. They called it the system blight, a creeping corruption that wasn't just creating monsters, but was actively unwriting reality itself. The aberration you fought was a symptom, not the disease, Ilara explained one night, her desk covered in ancient scrolls and star charts. The blight is the disease. It's spreading from a source, like a crack spreading through glass. And at the center of that crack, I fear we will find an aberration that makes the one you fought look like a common goblin. The news of the blight sent the Mage Council into a panic. Their solution was draconian and swift. A royal decree was issued. All anomalous entities, anyone exhibiting non-standard abilities or immunity to the blight's effects, were to be taken into custody for the protection of the realm. It was a warrant for Kael's arrest, wrapped in the language of public safety. "They're not going to study you, boy," Thorbeck growled, barricading the door to his office. "They want to control you, or dissect you to find an answer. We're out of time." The old dwarf unlocked a hidden safe behind a tapestry of a great dwarven battle. From it, he pulled a crumbling map. "There is one place they won't dare look for you. A place spoken of only in whispers. The First Forge." Ilara gasped. "The Forge isn't a myth?" "No," Thorbeck said. "It's where the ancients anchored the system to our world. It's a place of pure, fundamental code. If there's a way to halt the blight, the answer is there. But the journey is treacherous. Through the Dragon-Tooth Mountains. You will not survive alone." A heavy knock rattled the door. "Open in the name of the Council." There was a sudden crash of shattered wood from another door. Revar, the paladin Kael had humiliated, stood there, his golden armor scuffed, his shield on his arm. He had chosen a side. "My order swore an oath to protect the realm, not the pride of politicians in robes. The blight is the true enemy. My shield is yours, Null." He still couldn't bring himself to use Kael's name. And so the Fellowship was formed. Kael the Corrector, Ilara the Lore Master, and Revar the Shield. Under the cover of night, they fled Nexus, a trio of fugitives racing against the decay of the world. Their journey took them first through the blighted lands of the Green Valley. The corruption was worse than the reports had described. The air hummed with a dissonant energy. Trees glitched in and out of existence. Rivers flowed backward. Here, Revar's holy powers were useless, fizzling into harmless sparks. Ilara's detection spells gave her splitting headaches. But Kael felt fine. The chaotic code of the blight didn't affect him. His basic skills worked perfectly. More than that, he could almost read the corruption. By observing the glitching nature around him, he felt new basic fundamentals awakening within him. He focused on a rotting tree and willed its decay to hasten. Ding! Basic skill learned. Minor decay. He saw the air shimmer and bend reality around a floating rock. He mimicked the feeling, the intent. Ding! Basic skill learned. Distort. These skills were his key to survival. When they came to a chasm where the bridge was glitching, phasing in and out of reality, Kael used minor reinforce on the air itself where the bridge was supposed to be, creating a solid, temporary path for them to cross. When they ran out of clean water, Ilara identified a corrupted spring. Kael used a combination of aquasphere to draw the water and a careful application of minor decay to destroy the visible contaminants, making it drinkable. They were being hunted. The Mage Council's elite hunters, the Purifiers, were on their trail. Their leader was Archmage Terran, a dogmatic and powerful sorcerer who believed the Blight was a divine punishment for the system's impurities, and Kael was the greatest impurity of all. In the foothills of the Dragon Tooth, the Purifiers cornered them in an ancient ruin. Terran, his face a mask of cold fury, raised his staff. "The disease must be cleansed." He unleashed a torrent of pure magic. Revar planted his shield, yelling, "Get behind me!" But the magic wasn't a simple projectile. It bent, flowing around the shield. Ilara frantically tried to cast a counterspell, but it unraveled mid-air. Kael reacted on instinct. He didn't have a magic shield, he didn't have a counterspell, but he had Distort. He threw his hand forward and focused the skill not on the spell, but on the space directly in front of them. The air wavered like a heat haze. Terran's powerful spell hit the distortion field and simply bent. It veered harmlessly into the sky, detonating against a cliff face miles away. Terran stared, utterly stunned. His ultimate attack, nullified by a trick a first-year apprentice wouldn't even recognize as a spell. The standoff gave them the chance they needed. Revar, seeing an opening, didn't use a flashy charge of light. He just ran, a simple, brutal sprint, and slammed his shield into the ground in front of the Purifiers. It wasn't a magic skill, just pure physics and muscle. The shockwave threw them off balance, and Kael's party disappeared deeper into the ruins. During the escape, Revar protected Ilara from a falling pillar with his own body, earning a deep gash in his arm. As Ilara tended the wound, she looked at the paladin with new respect. "You didn't use a holy art to protect yourself," she noted. Revar grunted. "My holy arts are useless here, but a slab of reinforced steel still works. The Null is teaching me to see the world without the system's filter." As they climbed higher into the mountains, Ilara pieced together the final clues from a set of tablets they'd found in the ruin. "Thorbeck was right," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror and awe.
The system. It wasn't just meant to protect us. It was a prison. It was built to contain one specific entity. The texts call it the original aberration, a being of pure anti-code. The Blight isn't the system breaking down, it's the prisoner breaking out. The weight of it all finally hit Kael. He sat alone that night, looking at his simple, scarred hands. He wasn't just fixing a machine, he was a prison guard, and the universe's most dangerous inmate was breaking loose. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted to Ilara. "I'm just a boy from the lower districts. I learned to parry a goblin's club. How can I fight the thing that's eating reality?" "Because you don't fight by its rules," Ilara said softly. "You are the one thing it cannot predict. The first forge. It wasn't a forge of metal and fire, but of logic and light. It was a vast, silent chamber at the heart of the mountain, dominated by a colossal, floating crystal that pulsed with a faint, multicolored light. The walls were covered in lines of glowing code that constantly shifted. And they could feel it, the blight. It was pouring from a crack in the giant crystal,
a wound of dark, glitching energy. As they stepped into the chamber, Archmage Theron and his purifiers appeared, blocking the exit. But at the same time, the forge's own defenses activated. Golems of pure code, ancient and powerful, materialized from the walls. Their objective simple: eliminate all entities, classified or unclassified. A chaotic three-way battle erupted. Rivar and the golems formed a wall against the purifiers. Ilara desperately searched for a control console, shouting translations of the shifting code at Kale. And Kale ran, dodging blasts of magic and fists of pure data, his destination the corrupted crystal heart. As he reached it, the shadow within the crystal lashed out. It was a being of pure void, and Kale felt its terrifying alien consciousness touch his. It wasn't evil, it was just opposite. It saw the structured reality of the system as an intolerable prison, and it wanted out. Archmage Theron saw it too. In that moment, he understood his catastrophic error. This wasn't an impurity to be cleansed, it was the end of everything. With a final cry of atonement, he turned his power on himself. My pride has doomed us all, but my magic can buy us moments. He erupted in a blaze of pure energy, not attacking the entity, but reinforcing the crystal around it, becoming a temporary, living seal. Kale knew he had seconds. He couldn't destroy the aberration, he couldn't just patch the crack. He had to change the very nature of the prison. He placed his hands on the crystal. He didn't push power into it. He listened. He felt the base code, the fundamentals. Then, he began his work. It wasn't a fight. It was creation. He channeled minor reinforce to stabilize the crystal structure. He used minor decay to target and unravel the corrupted code of the blight. He infused glimmer, not as light, but as a packet of pure, simple data. He layered skill upon skill, dash, stone shard, distort, aquasphere, not as attacks, but as commands. He was writing a new law. If aberration, then quarantine protocol, null parameter. He was forcing the system to acknowledge him, to create a new rule for something that had no rules. He was performing a live, system-wide patch, a reboot. The crystal flared with a blinding, pure white light. The shadow of the aberration recoiled, not destroyed, but contained. The cracks sealed, and the dark blight energy vanished, sucked back into the now stable crystal. The lines of code on the walls stopped shifting, settled, and then glowed with a new, steady luminescence. The battle was over. Theron was gone, a final shimmer of arcane dust settling on the floor. The remaining purifiers stared, their fanaticism broken, the golems deactivated. The great crystal no longer pulsed with the distinct colors of the classes. It shone with a single, neutral, all-encompassing white light. Ilara approached it, her hands trembling. You didn't just fix it, you introduced a new variable. The null parameter. You rewrote its foundation. The rigid class structure, the absolute definitions. They're weaker now. You've given the world potential. They emerged from the Dragon's Tooth Mountains to a world saved and a world changed. The blight began to recede. The stories of flickering skills were replaced by whispers of new possibilities, of warriors discovering a knack from minor illusions, of mages finding they could reinforce their own robes. The cage had been opened. Kale stood on a high peak, Rivar and Ilara beside him. He was no longer a null, an outcast, or even a corrector. He was the architect of a new era. His quest was not over. In many ways, it had just begun. He had to teach a world built on rigid rules how to embrace freedom, all while knowing that the original aberration was still there, locked in his quarantine. He was the hero who had broken the system only to build it anew.
Their return to Nexus was not to the city they had left. The receding blight had left behind a world buzzing with chaotic potential. The rigid castes of class and level were dissolving. A baker in the lower districts discovered he could use minor reinforce on his dough to create impossibly perfect bread. A city guard, a lifelong warrior, found that he could cast glimmer to momentarily daze a fleeing thief. The world was waking up, vibrant and terrifyingly unpredictable. They called it the Age of Chaos, but Kale saw it as the Age of Potential. Power, however, abhors a vacuum. The old structures, the Mage Council, the noble houses, the knightly orders, saw this new freedom not as a gift, but as a threat to their very existence. They formed a coalition, the Trinity Council, ostensibly to guide the kingdom through these trying times, but in reality, to regain control. Kale, Rivar, and Alara were summoned before them, not as heroes, but as subjects for interrogation. The chamber was opulent, a stark contrast to the stark functionality of the First Forge. 3 figures sat on thrones. The new Archmage, a woman named Lyra who had replaced Theron, High Lord Valerius, representing the noble houses, and Commander Titus, the stoic head of the royal army. "You have destabilized the foundation of our society, Kale," she began, her voice cold as ice. "While you may have stopped the blight, you have unleashed a new plague, ambition without structure. Commoners are wielding arts they cannot comprehend. This cannot be allowed to continue." "The system was a cage," Kale countered, his voice steady. "You just miss the comfort of its bars because you held the keys." "We bring order," roared High Lord Valerius. "You bring anarchy. We demand you share the secrets of the First Forge. We must learn to control and restrict this chaotic surge of power." That was the line. Kale realized they didn't want to understand. They wanted to monopolize. He refused. He, Ilara, and Rivar were branded as rogue elements, anarchists who threatened the peace. They were not imprisoned. Their public image as heroes was too strong for that. But they were ostracized, placed under constant surveillance. Nexus was no longer their home. With the resources Thorbeck had secretly provided, they traveled to the neutral territory of the Iron Peaks, a haven for outcasts and innovators. There, Kale laid the foundation for his true life's work, the Academy of Fundamentals. It wasn't a grand castle like the Mage Academy. It was a sprawling campus of workshops, training grounds, and libraries, open to anyone, regardless of their origin or lack of a formal class. A half-orc could learn basic alchemy from an elven scholar. A former rogue could teach silent step to a noble's daughter who wanted to escape her gilded cage. The Academy's motto was simple: the root is stronger than the branch. Kale wasn't a king, but he became a teacher. He taught minor parry to 100 students at a time, showing them that defense was a matter of timing, not a high-level skill. Ilara became the head lore master, her deep knowledge of the new system attracting the brightest minds from across the land. And Rivar, finding a new calling, founded the Wardens, an order dedicated to protecting the Academy and traveling the land to help those struggling with their newfound chaotic abilities. For 2 years, a fragile peace held. The world was split between the Trinity Council's rigid control and the Academy's explosive freedom. But Kale knew the original aberration was still there, contained but conscious. He could sometimes feel it at the edge of his thoughts, a cold,
patient, opposite presence. The new threat did not come as a monster. It came as a whisper. It started in the remote northern barony of Volgrad, a desolate land ruled by the ambitious and charismatic Baron Volkov. Reports spoke of a strange phenomenon, a whispering plague. People would suddenly stop, stand motionless for hours, and when they returned to their senses, they were hollow. They retained their skills, their memories, their speech, but their ambition, their emotions, their very soul seemed to have been scooped out. They became perfect, efficient, unthinking cogs in Volkov's rapidly growing industrial machine. They were called the Hollowed. Ilara was the first to realize the terrifying truth. "This isn't a disease of the body or mind," she said, her hands trembling as she reviewed the data. "The Hollowed, their status screens are blank, not null, like yours was, Kale. Just empty. As if their connection to the system has been perfectly and completely severed." Kale felt a cold dread. The original aberration was learning. It could no longer break the system, so it was learning to lure people out of it. It offered them a final, perfect freedom. Freedom from choice, from pain, from self. The ultimate anti-code. He, Rivar, and Ilara traveled to Volgrad under the guise of diplomatic envoys. The barony was a grim parody of efficiency. Hollowed citizens worked tirelessly in the mines and forges, their faces blank, their movements precise. There was no crime, no art, no laughter. Baron Volkov greeted them in his iron fortress. He was a handsome, imposing man, with eyes that burned with a fervent light. "Architect Kale," he smiled, "an honor. You see before you the future, the perfection of your philosophy. You sought to free people from the system. I have completed your work." "You've enslaved them," Rivar growled, and his hand on his sword. "Have I?" he countered, gesturing to a hollowed servant who poured them wine without a single wasted motion. "She feels no pain, no fear, no doubt. Is that not a purer existence? The system gave us classes, skills, but it also gave us greed, envy, rage. I am simply offering an alternative, a clean slate." Kale looked into the Baron's eyes and saw the truth. This wasn't just the power-hungry noble. Volkov was a true believer, a prophet for a new, empty God. "The aberration is speaking to you," he said quietly. "You've made a pact with it." Volkov's smile widened. "It doesn't speak, it resonates. It showed me the flaw in your reboot, architect. You opened the cage, but you left the prisoners to wander in the frightening light of freedom. I offer them a comfortable darkness, and soon the entire world will beg for it." The trap was sprung. The fortress gates slammed shut. An army of the Hollowed, silent and uncannily coordinated, advanced on them. They were terrifying opponents. They didn't feel pain, so they didn't flinch or retreat. A Hollowed warrior would take a sword to the chest and simply continue its attack protocol until its body physically fell apart. They used their old-class skills with cold, machine-like precision.
The fight was desperate. Rivar became a bastion of steel, his shield blocking blows that would have killed a normal man. Ilara used her deep knowledge of the system to create logical traps, illusions and runes that the Hollowed's simple, direct consciousness couldn't process, causing them to freeze or short-circuit. But there were too many. As they were being pushed back into the fortress's main hall, Baron Volkov stood on a high balcony, watching them. He wasn't Hollowed. He was something more. Dark, glitching energy, the same anti-code as the blight, coiled around him like a cloak. "You don't understand," Volkov called, his voice echoing with a dual, dissonant tone. "This isn't a plague, it's an ascension. The aberration isn't a prisoner, it's a gateway. He raised his hands, and the anti-code energy surged from him, striking several of his own guards. The hollowed soldiers didn't die. Their forms began to shift, to corrupt, their limbs elongating, their faces melting away to reveal maws of pure static. They were becoming aberrations. The first forge wasn't a prison, it was a chrysalis. And your reboot, your null parameter, you didn't just patch the system, you created a key, a back door. You gave the aberration a way to directly interface with a willing host. You gave it me. Kale stared in horror. His greatest achievement, the patch that had saved the world, had been turned into the ultimate weapon against it. He hadn't just built a better cage, he'd installed a door and handed the key to a madman. The age of chaos is over. The being that was once Volkov declared, its voice a chorus of glitches. The age of nothing has begun. Surrounded by newly formed aberrations, facing the first human avatar of the entity they had tried to contain, Kale, Ilara, and Revar understood the true scale of the war. They weren't fighting to fix the system anymore. They were fighting to save reality from being deleted. Their quest had just taken them beyond the confines of the world and into a battle for existence itself.
There is no strategy against infinity, no tactic against an enemy that does not fear destruction. The newly formed aberrations, once human guards, moved with a horrifying, liquid grace. They were walking glitches in reality, and the heroes were trapped in the heart of the error message. "We can't fight them," Ilara screamed, pulling Kale back from a lashing tendril of pure static. "Their existence is a paradox. They defy physics." "Then we defy the fortress," Revar bellowed. His golden armor, a symbol of the forgotten age of rules, was now dented and blackened. He was no longer a paladin of the system. He was simply a shield, a wall. "Kale, you see the fundamentals, the code. Is there a weakness in this place?" Kale's mind raced, filtering out the chaos. He looked past the monsters, past the avatar of Volkov laughing on his balcony. He looked at the structure itself, the iron fortress, the support beams, the mortar between the stones. He could almost see the faint shimmer of the reinforced spells worked into its foundations decades ago. Old, powerful, but rigid, predictable. "The main support pillar, in the center of the hall," Kale yelled. "Its structural integrity is absolute, but it's a single point of failure. If it goes, the whole hall comes down." "How do we break something that was built to be unbreakable?" Ilara cried out. "We don't break it," Kale said, a desperate, insane plan forming in his mind. "We convince it to break itself." He looked at Revar. "I need time, just a few seconds." Revar understood. He took a deep breath, planted his feet, and slammed the base of his shield into the stone floor. This time, however, something was different. A faint, pure white light, the neutral light of the new system, began to glow from the edges of his shield. He wasn't invoking a holy skill. He was using his own will, his absolute conviction, as a catalyst. "I am the shield," he roared, and the light exploded outwards. It wasn't an attack, it was a declaration. Sanctuary, a skill that had never existed before, born of pure purpose. The aberrations recoiled from the light, not harmed, but momentarily repelled by its absolute, ordered nature. Revar was the anchor. Ilara provided the theory, shouting, "The old reinforcement spells are layered. They'll resist any direct force, but they can't handle rapid opposing commands." Kale raised his hands, ignoring the monstrous avatar above. He focused all his will on the colossal pillar. He didn't try to destroy it. He began to issue commands. "Minor reinforce," he poured his energy into strengthening the pillar's core. The ancient runes on it flared to life, and in the next microsecond, minor decay. He targeted the outermost layer of the stone, willing it to weaken. He began to pulse the two skills, faster and faster. Reinforce, decay, reinforce, decay. He was creating a resonance cascade, a violent argument in the very code of the fortress's existence. The pillar began to groan, not from damage, but from confusion. The stone began to flake away as the fundamental laws governing it were ripped apart. Volkov's avatar stopped laughing. "Cease this! You will bring the mountain on us all!" "That's the plan," Kel grunted, sweat pouring down his face. The pillar screamed, cracks spiderwebbed across its surface. The light from Ravar's shield began to flicker, the onslaught of aberrations too great. "Kale, now!" he yelled, his voice straining. With a final agonizing push, Kale unleashed one last command into the pillar's core. Distort. The pillar didn't explode. It simply twisted. For a single, silent moment, the colossal column of stone warped like molten glass, and then it ceased to exist. The ceiling of the great hall collapsed. An avalanche of stone and iron thundered down. Kale grabbed Alara and dashed towards a side passage they had noted earlier. He looked back. Ravar was still there, his shield held high. The light of his sanctuary, the only thing holding back a literal mountain of rubble from crushing them, creating a small, fleeting pocket of safety for their escape. "Ravar, come on!" Kale screamed. The paladin smiled, a grim, bloody expression. "My oath was to protect the realm. That starts with you. Go, find a way. I will hold the line." "We're not leaving you," Ilara sobbed. "That's an order, Lore Master," Ravar grunted, his legs trembling under the immense strain. The light of his shield flared, becoming blindingly bright. "Now go." The last thing they saw was the white light consuming everything, followed by the deafening roar of the mountain collapsing in on itself. They escaped through the forgotten tunnels, emerging miles away, bruised, battered, and broken. Ravar was gone. The fortress of Volgrad was a tomb of rock and silence. Kale fell to his knees, the weight of his friend's sacrifice crashing down on him. It was his fault, his patch, his back door. He had given Volkov the key, and Ravar had paid the price. News of the Volgrad catastrophe spread like wildfire. The Trinity Council spun the story masterfully. They declared Kale a terrorist who, in his lust for power, had experimented with forbidden arts and destroyed an entire barony. They didn't mention the aberrations or the hollowed. They created a simpler, more palatable monster, the Null who had gone too far. A global manhunt was declared. Kale and Alara were now the most wanted people in the world. Hiding in a secret safe house on the outskirts of Azurigard, Alara worked feverishly, cross-referencing her notes from the First Forge with the terrifying events she had witnessed. "It makes a horrible kind of sense," she whispered a week later, her eyes wide with a terrifying new theory. "The null parameter you created, Kale, it acts as a universal admin key. It allows a user to interface directly with the system's core functions. Volkov used his connection to the aberration to grant it admin access. He became a willing host for a virus." She looked at Kale, who had barely spoken a word since their escape. "But if a virus can use the key, so can the antivirus." Kale looked up, his eyes hollow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we fight fire with fire," Ilara said, her voice gaining strength. "If the aberration can have a human avatar to execute its will upon reality, then the system can too. It needs a user with root access. It needs a corrector. It needs you, Kale. Not just to use fundamental skills, but to become a living conduit for the system's ordered reality, to become its champion in a war of concepts." The idea was monumental, terrifying. "How?" Kale asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How is that even possible?" "The First Forge was just a terminal, an access point," Ilara explained, unrolling a massive ancient map she had taken from Thorbeck's office. It depicted a geography that was both familiar and utterly alien. But it wasn't the server. It wasn't the core. According to the oldest, most forbidden texts, the system's source code is not stored in a place of logic and light. It is stored in a place of absolute silence and perfect preservation. A place that exists on a different layer of reality, tethered to our world in only one location. She pointed to a spot on the map, a region marked with warnings of madness and non-existence, a place known as the Shattered Wastes. It is called the Silent Library of Jormungandr. It is where the blueprints of our reality are kept. If you can reach it, and if you can interface with the Prime Codex, you might be able to fight Volkov on the same conceptual level. You could rewrite his corruption as fast as he creates it. It was their only path forward, a quest not for a weapon, but for knowledge, not for power, but for the authority to wield it. Kale stood up, the hollowness in his eyes replaced by a spark of grim resolve. He thought of Ravar, buried under a mountain, holding the line even in death. His sacrifice could not be in vain. He said, "The Council will be hunting us. Volkov's new aberrations will be spreading. The whole world will be against us." Kale looked at the map, at the impossible destination, at the heart of a cursed land. He touched the spot with his finger. "Then they'll have to get in line," he said. They were two fugitives against a world descending into madness, on a quest to find a mythical library to turn a broken boy into the avatar of reality itself. Their journey to save existence had begun.
The world became a maze of back alleys and forgotten paths. Every friendly face was a potential informant for the Trinity Council, every shadow a potential hunter. Kael and Alara moved like ghosts, their names now synonymous with treason. The whispering plague spread, no longer confined to the north. Entire towns would go silent overnight, their citizens becoming hollowed, their productivity redirected to some unknown grand design of the being that wore Baron Volkov's face. Volkov had ascended. He no longer hid in a fortress. He took the capital, Argentis, without a single casualty. He simply walked into the Trinity Council's chamber, and by the time he walked out, Archmage Lyra and the others were his most devoted, hollow-eyed servants. He didn't rule with fear, he ruled with emptiness. He was dismantling the world's ambitions, its passions, its soul, piece by piece. Their destination, the shattered wastes, was a place most people believed to be a myth, a cartographer's warning against sailing off the edge of the world. It took them months of perilous travel to reach its borders, and when they did, they understood why it was feared. The shattered wastes was not a desert of sand, but a desert of broken reality. The sky was a permanent bruised twilight, with constellations that never moved. There was no wind, only a profound, unnatural silence that pressed in on the ears. Here, the laws of physics were merely suggestions. They saw rivers of forgotten memories flowing uphill, forests of crystalline trees that chimed with the sound of unspoken thoughts, and mirages of cities that had never been built. Ilara's scholarly mind, accustomed to logic and order, struggled. The blight was a corruption of the system. This is a place where the system was never fully installed. It's the raw, untamed code of reality. It's beautiful, and it's lethal. Their fundamental skills became unreliable. A dash might send Kael 10 feet or 100. An aquasphere might produce water, or it might produce a handful of regret. They survived on intellect and instinct alone. But the wastes had their own inhabitants, drawn to its chaotic freedom. They were found by the Weavers, a nomadic tribe of people who had been born with strange, Null-like abilities long before Kael's reboot. They didn't learn skills, they were born with an intuitive understanding of the Waste's strange laws. Their leader was a young blind woman named Anya, who saw not with her eyes, but by reading the threads of reality around her. "You walk like a broken sound in a silent song," Anya said, as her people surrounded Kael and Ilara. She wasn't hostile, merely curious. "You carry the scent of the great machine, yet you are not a part of it.
You are the glitch that seeks the source code. The weavers gave them sanctuary and their hidden oasis, a place called the Still Point, where reality was stable. Anya explained that her people had always lived in harmony with the wastes, weaving the broken threads of reality into something new: shelter, food, even art. They were the opposite of the system, which imposed order. The weavers coasted. The silent library is real, Anya confirmed, her sightless eyes seeming to look straight through Kael. But it is not a place you can enter with force or knowledge. It is a conscious entity. It only opens for one who can resonate with its purpose. Perfect equilibrium. It will test you. It will ask you one question. How do you fix that which is not broken, but merely unfinished? While Kael learned from Anya, trying to understand this new, intuitive way of interacting with the world, Ilara and the Weaver's scholars shared knowledge. They discovered a terrifying pattern in Volkov's expansion. He wasn't just conquering random towns, he was targeting locations of immense systemic importance: the Mage Towers, the Titan's Graveyard, the sunken city of the ancients. He's not just conquering, Ilara realized with dawning horror. He's placing his own terminals. He's building a new network, an anti-system, with himself as the server. When it's complete, he won't need to persuade people to become hollowed. He can issue a single command and delete the consciousness of the entire world. Their time was running out. Anya agreed to guide them to the library's threshold. The avatar of nothing grows, she said. We feel his silence spreading, smothering the beautiful chaos of the wastes. You must succeed. The entrance to the library was not a door, but a perfectly smooth, circular obsidian field, a kilometer in diameter, that reflected nothing. It was a hole in the universe. In its center floated a single small, perfectly white cube. That is the lock, Anya whispered from the edge of the field. The Prime Codex is within. To enter, you must solve the riddle. You must achieve perfect equilibrium. As Kael stepped onto the obsidian, a wave of pure information washed over him. A silent voice that spoke not in words, but in raw concepts. It showed him the universe, a maelstrom of infinite chaos, and it showed him the system, a rigid crystalline structure imposed upon that chaos. Both were imperfect, both were extremes. It asked Anya's question. How do you fix that which is not broken, but merely unfinished? Ilara watched from the edge, desperately analyzing the faint energy readings. It's a resonance test, Kael. It's not about power, it's about balance. Kael closed his eyes. He thought of his journey, the rigid cruelty of the old system, the terrifying anarchy of the aberrations, the beautiful chaos of the wastes, the horrifying emptiness of the hollowed. Order and chaos, something and nothing. He knew what he had to do. He didn't attack the cube. He didn't try to analyze it. He began to tune himself. He stood in the absolute center of the field. First, he channeled minor reinforce, but not on an object. He channeled it into the concept of order itself. A faint grid of blue light appeared on the obsidian beneath his feet. The cube pulsed with a low, rigid hum. Then he channeled minor decay into the concept of chaos. A swirling pattern of wild red energy appeared, clashing with the blue grid. The cube's hum became a discordant screech. He was holding two opposite, absolute concepts in his mind, in his very soul. He was the fulcrum. Slowly, carefully, he began to balance them. He didn't weaken one and strengthen the other. He used distort on the very boundary between them, blurring the lines. He used silent step and dash, not to move his body, but to move his consciousness, darting between the two ideologies, finding the harmonies between them. He was weaving, just as Anya's people did. He was coaxing reality, not commanding it. The blue grid and the red swirls began to merge, flowing into each other, creating a new, breathtakingly complex pattern of incandescent purple.
The screeching of the cube softened, its pitch rising until it became a single, perfect, harmonious note. And then silence. The white cube dissolved into motes of light. The obsidian field became transparent, revealing a spiral staircase descending into a universe of pure information, a library of stars. He had done it. He had opened the way. But the act of achieving perfect conceptual resonance had a price. For a single moment, Kale, the boy who was Null, had become the most stable point in all of reality. And in a world of chaos, a point of perfect stability is not quiet. It is a beacon. In the corrupted capital of Argentis, the being that was Volkov looked up from its work, its hollow eyes turning towards the shattered wastes. "There you are," it resonated. In the reclaimed mage towers, the new seers of the Trinity Council screamed as their scrying pools exploded with pure white light. "He's there! The anarchist is in the shattered wastes!" Kale and Ilara stood at the top of the staircase, the secrets of existence laid out before them. But the silence was broken by a sound that now echoed across the entire planet, the sound of marching feet and the silent, hungry scream of unfolding aberrations. They had reached the sanctuary, but in doing so, they had revealed its location to all their enemies. The final siege was about to begin.
There was no time. With the sounds of an approaching war echoing from the world above, Kale and Ilara descended into the silent library. It was not a place of books. It was a cosmos of thought. They walked on pathways of starlight, surrounded by nebulae of raw data and whispering constellations of forgotten memories. Every step was a lesson. They witnessed the birth of a sun, not as a historical fact, but by feeling its gravitational pull on their very souls. They experienced the first ever act of courage from a creature that had just crawled from the sea, feeling its fear and its resolve as their own. At the center of it all was the Prime Codex. It was not a book or a crystal, but a perfect sphere of white silence that contained every law, every possibility, every choice that had ever been or could ever be. As Kale reached out, It did not resist. It welcomed him. He saw it all, the creation of their universe by beings of immense but flawed vision. The system, their grand attempt to shield life from the howling chaos of non-existence, and the original aberration, its equal and opposite, not an evil entity, but the fundamental force of entropy, the universal drive towards silence and simplicity imprisoned by the system's rigid logic. He saw that the correctors, the nulls like him, were the final secret protocol, a failsafe designed not to repair the prison, but to render it obsolete by teaching reality to balance itself. He was not meant to be a guard. He was meant to be a teacher, and the final lesson was about to begin. Above, the siege had begun. The weavers, led by Anya, met the first wave of aberrations. They did not fight with sword and shield, but with reality itself. They wove the ground into grasping hands, coaxed the light into confusing prisms, and unraveled the aberration's physical forms thread by thread. It was a beautiful, desperate dance. Then the Trinity Council's army arrived, legions of knights and mages marching in perfect, rigid formation. They saw the weavers and the aberrations as one chaotic mass and attacked indiscriminately. The battlefield became a three-way storm of chaos, order, and anti-code. The Council's predictable tactics were useless against the aberrations, and their forces began to crumble. Just as Volkov's main host, a tidal wave of hollowed and monstrous aberrations crested the final ridge, a light pierced the bruised twilight of the wastes. It was a brilliant, pure white, and from it walked a figure. He wore no armor, for his body was made of living, solid light. He carried no shield, for his very presence was an unbreakable law of protection. It was Revar. He was not a ghost, he was an answer. When he had invoked his own true skill, Sanctuary, he had touched the same fundamental code as Kale. Buried under the mountain, his dying will to protect had resonated with the Prime Codex. The system had answered, not by reviving him, but by elevating him to the embodiment of his purest purpose. He stood before the charging horde, a single point of absolute order. The wave of nothingness crashed against him and broke. He held the line. At that moment, Kale emerged from the library. He was no longer a boy. He walked with the quiet stillness of a star, his eyes seeing the threads of code in everything. Ilara followed, her face streaked with tears of awe. He walked past the battle, past the weavers, past the stunned soldiers of the council, and past the living ideal of his friend, Revar. He walked until he stood before the avatar of the original aberration. "You have seen the truth, then," Volkov resonated, his voice a calm void. "You know you cannot destroy me. I am the inevitable end, the peace of non-existence." "You are not the end," Kale said, his voice quiet but echoing in the soul of everyone present. "You have just never heard the other half." Volkov unleashed his ultimate power, a wave of conceptual deletion, erase existence. Kale did not raise a shield. He did not counter. He opened his arms and accepted the wave of nothingness, and as it washed over him, he did not crumble. He gave it a name. He gave it a purpose. He performed the final, ultimate act of a corrector. He wrote a new law.
He took the aberration's absolute concept of nothing. He took the system's absolute concept of something, and with the full authority of the Prime Codex flowing through him, he bound them together with a new, unbreakable fundamental law: choice. A pulse of pure, incandescent purple light erupted from Kale, washing over the entire world. It was not a wave of destruction or creation. It was a wave of understanding. Volkov's avatar froze. The entity within him was not destroyed, it was defined. It no longer was a cancerous void seeking to delete all things. It had been given a role. It was now the shadow that proves the sun is shining, the silence between the notes that makes the music, the possibility of an end that gives every moment of life infinite, precious meaning. The being that was Volkov looked at its hands, and for the first time it saw them. The anticode unraveled, and a simple man, pale and confused, stood in its place, the whispering plague forever gone from his mind. All across the world, the great unraveling began. The hollowed stopped their work. They looked up at the sky, and a single tear rolled down a cheek, the first emotion felt in years. The aberrations either dissolved into harmless data, their paradox resolved, or solidified into new strange forms of life, now free to choose their own path. The war was over. Not with a bang, but with a breath.
The years that followed were called the Age of Choice. The old system was gone, replaced by a universe of limitless potential. The Trinity Council was disbanded, its members humbled by the sight of a reality they could never have controlled. Ilara, with the help of the Weavers, founded a new great library at the Still Point, a place where all knowledge of the system, of the fundamentals, of the heart was open to all. Rivar, the man of living light, became a legend. He did not rule. He wandered the world, a silent guardian, his presence a comfort to those struggling with the awesome, terrifying weight of true freedom. He was the protector of everyone's right to choose. And Kale, he was offered thrones. He was called a god. He refused it all. With his task complete, the infinite knowledge of the Prime Codex receded, leaving behind only the wisdom he had earned. He became a man again. Sometimes, travelers on the long road to the Iron Peaks would speak of a quiet innkeeper with calm eyes, who could reinforce a cracked mug with a touch, and who always knew the perfect thing to say to a weary soul. They never knew he was the boy who was born without a path, and in doing so, had given them all the freedom to choose their own. His story was over, but for the first time in its long, troubled history, the story of the world had truly, finally begun.